Welcome back. Here we go again. So now we are going to chapter 17. Pa goes to town. Okay. We are going to read that chapter next. Are we ready? Okay. Before Pa went away, when Laura and Mary woke, he was gone and everything was empty and lonely. It was not as though Pa had only gone hunting. He was going to town, and he would not be back for 4 long days. Bunny had been shut up in the stable, so she couldn't follow her mother. Remember, Bunny is the colt? Yes, the foal, yeah, is pet's daughter or son. I don't know. I would think daughter with a name like Bunny, but who knows? All right. The trip was too long for a colt. Bunny whined lonesomely. Laura and Mary stayed in the house with Ma. Outdoors was too large and empty to play in when Pa was away. Jack was uneasy too, and watchful. At noon, Laura went with Ma to water Bunny and to move the cow's picket pen to fresh grass. The cow was quite gentle now. Remember, she was really wild. She kicked Pa to the ground when he tried to milk her the first time. But now she's calmed down. He said they would gentle her, and they did. She followed where Ma led, and she would even let Ma milk her. At milking time, Ma was putting on her bonnet when suddenly all Jack's hair stood up stiff on his neck and back, and he rushed out of the house. They heard a yell and a scramble and a shout. Call off your dog! Call off your dog! Mr. Edwards was on top of the woodpile and Jack was climbing up after him. He's got me treed, Mr. Edwards said, backing along the top of the woodpile. Ma could hardly make Jack come away. He had to let Mr. Edwards come down from the woodpile, but he watched him every minute. Ma said, I declare, he seems to know that Mr. Ingalls isn't here. Mr. Edwards said that the dog knew more than most folks gave them credit for. On his way to town that morning, Pa had stopped by Mr. Edwards' house and asked him to come over every day to see that everything was all right. Mr. Edwards was such a good neighbor that he had come at chore time to do the chores for Ma. But Jack had made up his mind not to let anyone but Ma go near the cow or Bunny while Pa was gone. He had to be shut in the house while Mr. Edwards did the chores. When Mr. Edwards went away, he said to Ma, Keep that dog in the house tonight, and you'll be safe. The dark crept slowly along all around the house. The wind cried mournfully as owls said, Hoo, hoo. A wolf howled and Jack growled low in his throat. Mary and Laura sat close to Mom in the firelight. They knew they were safe in the house because Jack was there, and Ma had pulled the latch string in. Next day was empty like the first. Jack paced around the stable and around the house and then around the stable and back to the house. He would not pay any attention to Laura. That afternoon Mrs. Scott came to visit with Ma. While they visited, Laura and Mary sat politely as still as mice. Mrs. Scott admired the new rocking chair. The more she rocked in it, the more she enjoyed it, and she said how neat and comfortable and pretty the house was. She said she hoped that they would have no trouble with Indians. Mr. Scott had heard rumors about trouble. She said, Land knows they'd never do anything with this country themselves. All they do is roam around over like wild animals. Treaties or no treaties, the land belongs to the folks that'll farm it. That's only common sense and justice. Not quite accurate, is it? But that's what Mrs. Scott was thinking. Okay? She did not know why the government made treaties with Indians. I'm not going to read that. That's not nice. It's what people used to think, but it's not nice. The very thought that Indians made her blood run cold, she said. I can't forget the Minnesota massacre. My pa and my brothers went out with the rest of the settlers and stopped them only 15 miles west of us. I've heard pa tell often how Ma made a sharp sound in her throat, and Mrs. Scott stopped. Whatever a massacre was, it wasn't something that grown-ups would talk about with little girls listening. After Mrs. Scott had gone, Laura asked Ma what a massacre was. Ma said she could not explain that now. It was something that Laura would understand when she was older. Mr. Edwards came to do the chores again that evening, and again Jack treed him on the wood pile. Ma had to drag him off. Oh, sorry, I lost my place. She told Mr. Edwards she couldn't think what had got into that dog. Maybe it was the wind that upset him. The wind had a strange, wild howl in it, and it went through Laura's clothes as if the clothes weren't even there. Her teeth and Mary's teeth chattered while they carried many armfuls of wood into the house. That night they thought of Pa and Independence. If nothing had delayed him, he would be camping there now, near the house and the people. Tomorrow he would be in the store buying things. Then, if he could get an early start, he would come part way home and camp on the prairie tomorrow night. The next night he might come home. In the morning the wind was blowing fiercely, and it was so cold that Ma kept the door shut. All right, there's Jack treeing Mr. Edwards up on the wood pile. Okay? Laura and Mary stayed by the fire and listened to the wind screaming around the house and howling in the chimney. That afternoon they wondered if Pa was leaving Independence and coming toward them, against the wind. Then, when it was dark, they wondered where he was camping. The wind was bitterly cold. It came even into the snug house and made their backs shiver while their faces roasted by the heat of the fire. Somewhere on the big, dark, lonesome prairie, Pa was camping in that wind. The next day was very long. They could not expect Pa in the morning, but they were waiting till they could expect him. In the afternoon they began to watch the creek road. Jack was watching it too. He whined to get out, and he went all around the stable and the house, stopping to look toward the creek bottom and show his teeth. The wind almost blew him off his feet. When he came in, he would not lie down. He walked about and worried. The hair rose on his neck and flattened and rose again. He tried to look out the window and then whined at the door. But when Ma opened it, he changed his mind and would not go out. Jack's afraid of something, Mary said. Jack's not afraid of anything, ever, Laura said. Laura, Mom said. It isn't nice to contradict Mary. In a minute, Jack decided to go out. He went to see that the cow and calf and Bunny were safe in the stable. And Laura wanted to tell Mary, I told you so. She didn't, but she wanted to. At chore time, Ma kept Jack in the house so he could not tree Mr. Edwards on the woodpile. Pa had not come yet. The wind blew Mr. Edwards in through the door. He was breathless and stiff with cold. He warmed himself by the fire before he did the chores, and when he had done them, he sat down to warm himself again. He told Ma that Indians were camping in the shelter of the bluffs. He had seen the smoke from their fires when he crossed the bottoms. He asked Ma if she had a gun. Ma said she had Pa's pistol, and Mr. Edwards said, "I reckon they'll stay close in camp a night like this." "Yes," Ma said. Mr. Edwards said he could make himself right comfortable with hay in the stable, and he would spend the night there if Ma said so. Ma thanked him kindly, but said she would not put him to that trouble. They would be safe enough with Jack. "I am expecting Mr. Ingalls any minute now," she told him. So Mr. Edwards put on his coat and cap and muffler and mittens and picked up his gun. He said he didn't guess that anything would bother her anyway. "No," Ma said. When she shut the door behind him, she pulled the latch string in. Though darkness had not come yet, Laura and Mary could see the creek road plainly, and they watched it until the dark hid it. Then Ma closed and barred the wooden window shutters. Pa had not come. They ate supper, they washed the dishes, they swept the hearth, and still Pa had not come. Out in the darkness where he was, the wind shrieked and wailed and howled. It rattled the door latch and shook the shutters. It screamed down the chimneys, and the fire roared and flared. All the time Laura and Mary strained their ears to hear the sound of wagon wheels. They knew Ma was listening too, though she was rocking and singing to Carrie. Carrie fell asleep and Ma went on gently rocking. At last she undressed Carrie and put her to bed. Laura and Mary looked at each other. They didn't want to go to bed. "Bedtime, girls," Ma said. Then Laura begged to be allowed to sit up till Pa came home, and Mary backed her up till Ma said they might. For a long, long time they sat up. Mary yawned, then Laura yawned, then they both yawned. But they kept their eyes wide open. Laura's eyes saw things grow very big and then very small. And sometimes she saw two Marys, and sometimes she couldn't see any at all. But she was going to sit up till Pa came home. Suddenly a fearful crash scared her, and Ma picked her up. She had fallen off the bench, smack on the floor. She tried to tell Ma that she wasn't sleepy enough to have to go to bed, but an enormous yawn almost split her head in two. So there she is, sitting on the bench. Well, she was. There's Mary. Laura fell off the bench. Okay. In the middle of the night, she sat straight up. Ma was still sitting in the rocking chair by the fire. The door latch rattled. The shutters shook. And the wind was howling. Mary's eyes were open, and Jack walked up and down. Then Laura heard again a wild howl that rose and fell and rose again. "Lie down, Laura, and go to sleep," Ma said gently. "What's that howling?" Laura said. "The wind is howling," said Ma. "Now mind me, Laura." Laura lay down, but her eyes would not shut. She knew that Pa was out in the dark, where the terrible howling was occurring. The wild men were in the bluffs along the creek bottoms, and Pa would have to cross the creek bottom in the dark. Jack growled. Then Ma began to sway gently in the comfortable rocking chair. Firelight ran up and down and up the barrel of Pa's pistol in her lap. And Ma sang softly and sweetly, "There is a happy land." Oh, I don't remember the tune, sorry. "Far, far away, where saints in glory stand, bright, bright as day. Oh, to hear the angels sing, glory to the Lord our King." Laura didn't know that she had gone to sleep. She thought the shining angels began to sing with Ma, and she lay listening to their heavenly singing until suddenly her eyes opened and she saw Pa standing by the fire. She jumped out of bed, shouted, "Oh, Pa! Pa!" Pa's boots were caked with frozen mud. His nose was red with cold. His hair wildly stood up on his head. He was so cold that coldness came through Laura's nightgown when she reached him. "Wait," he said. He wrapped Laura in Ma's big shawl and then hugged her. Everything was all right. The house was cozy, with firelight. There was warmth, brown smell of coffee. Ma was smiling and Pa was there. The shawl was so large that Mary wrapped the other end of it around her. Pa pulled off his stiff boots and warmed his stiff, cold hands. Then he sat on the bench and took Mary on one knee and Laura on the other, and he hugged them against him, all snug in the shawl. Their bare toes toasted in the heat up from the fire. "Ah," Pa said, "I thought I'd never get here." Ma rummaged around the stores he had brought and spooned brown sugar into a tin cup. Pa had brought sugar from Independence. "Your coffee will be ready in a minute, Charles," she said. "It rained between here and Independence going," Pa told them, "and coming back the mud froze between the spokes until the wheels were nearly solid. I had to get out and kick it loose so the horses could pull the wagon, and seemed like we'd no more than started when I had to get out and do it again. It was all I could do to keep Pet and Patty coming against the wind. They're so worn out they can hardly stagger. I never saw such a wind. It cuts like a knife." The wind had begun while he was in town. People there told him he had better wait until it blew itself out, but he wanted to get home. "It beats me," he said, "why they call a south wind a norther, and how a wind from the south can be so tenaciously cold. I never saw anything like it. Down here in this country, the north end of a south wind is the coldest wind I ever heard of." He drank his coffee and wiped his mustache with his handkerchief and said, "Ah, that is the spot, Caroline. Now I'm beginning to thaw out." Then his eyes twinkled at Ma, and they told her to open the square package on the table. "Be careful," he said. "Don't drop it." Ma stopped unwrapping it and said, "Oh, Charles, you didn't." "Open it," said Pa. In that square package there were 8 small squares of window glass. They could have glass windows in their house. Not one of the squares was broken. Pa had brought them safely all the way home. Ma shook her head and said he shouldn't have spent so much, but her whole face was smiling, and Pa laughed with joy. They were all so pleased all winter long they could look out the windows as much as they liked, and the sunshine could come in. All right, I'll show you page. So there he is. Pa said he thought that Ma and Mary and Laura would like glass windows better than other presents, and he was right. They did. There was a little paper sack full of pure white sugar. Ma opened it, and Laura and Mary looked at the sparkling whiteness of the beautiful sugar, and they each had a taste of it from a spoon. Then Ma tied it up carefully. They would have white sugar when company came. Best of all, Pa was safely home. Laura and Mary went back to sleep very comfortable all over. Everything was all right when Pa was there. And now he had nails and cornmeal and fat pork and salt and everything. He would not have to go to town again for a very long time. There she is. All right, that is all for today. So just wanted to tell you a little story. You know how I was talking about how you had to stop and kick? So when we lived in Maine and it would be like snowy, icy, and we would be driving along, the snow would and ice would stack up between the tire and the mud flap. And sometimes you'd have to pull over off the road and you have to get out and you have to kick the snow from between there because the tire did not roll right. It's not that it didn't roll at all, but it didn't roll very well. And so you would be using a lot of gas to try to make your car go forward. So you'd have to get out and kick them all off, just like Pa had to get out and kick it off of the tire of the wagon wheels. So that's pretty cool. It's still kind of the same thing, although his was mud and ours is like snow and ice. Okay, all right. So this video, you need to put down what I just said about the snow tires. Okay, talk about how the snow gets in between the tire and the mud flap and how you got to kick it out, just like Pa had to kick the mud out of the wagon wheels. Okay, so write that in the comments. Say, yes, I know about the snow being kicked out and the wagon wheel mud being kicked out. Okay, and you're going to get credit for that. It's going to count as a test. Okay, ooh, probably the easiest test you ever took in reading, right? All right, so I'm going to let you go. Remember, it's the private comments on Google. Don't comment on YouTube. Private comments on Google, okay? All right, I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye, guys.